Welcome to this webinar on developing talent effectively. I'm Nisa Chittikasem, and your main presenters today are Catherine Donaldson and Simon North. We are all part of the Position Ignition team, and we are delighted to explore today the interesting challenges in talent development. Both Catherine and Simon are well-established HR professionals, with Catherine being a learning and development specialist, a highly qualified executive coach and strengths coach, and Simon is an established speaker and expert on the world of work. So I think we're now ready to make a start. So welcome, Catherine and Simon.
I wanted to, before telling you about what we're going to cover in this webinar, just set some context about talent. For many of us, talent equals an organizational issue, an organizational strategy, something that at the organizational level we should do. But we also know that healthy organizations tend to have strong bonds that develop between the leader of teams, the manager as we mainly call them, and each of the employees that work for them, whether they're labeled talented or not. We'll come on to that in a moment. And there is a tension that exists in that team where you have talented members of teams. The tension of receiving them. It may not have been your idea to receive them as a manager. The issue of letting them go when maybe they are the most significant contributor to your team. So the team and the manager are absolutely fundamental to the talent context. And of course, so is the individual. That's obvious. But how does the individual feel about working within that team and the organization? Not just today, but in the medium and the long term, because the talent context has all of those timeline elements to it. So what we want to really say right at the beginning is that this is quite a significant issue. Good organizations, whether they be small and growing or whether they be quite large, must see talent as an important and lasting issue. The organization's intentions must always be to create a more secure future, one that provides the levels of service and or profitability that the shareholders expect from them. And in order to do that, they need to concentrate on growth as an organization, which is directly correlated to the growth and learning of the individuals that are in there, because that's how the organization sustains itself in terms of its profit, its service, and its brand. So in this session, we want to really focus on the how. We're going to talk quite a bit about the questions behind why we do things and what's involved, but it's really about how do we go about it in order that we can be good at making our talent work effectively for us.
Thank you, Simon, and good afternoon, everybody. Let's begin by talking about what we mean by talent. And when we talk about talent, we often think of it in an organizational context. So when we talk about organizations' talent, we're talking about the collective human capital within an organization. The human capital that through work contributes to achieving organizational goals. And on an individual level, talent is something that we naturally do well. So it could be that I'm a naturally fast runner, I'm naturally good with numbers, or perhaps I'm someone who is naturally good at standing up and presenting to others. Whatever it is that I'm naturally good at may be considered a talent for me. So if that's talent, what's talent management? Well, there's lots of definitions out there on the internet, but when it comes down to it, talent management, very simply put, is about maximizing the potential of an individual or organizational talent pool to achieve optimum performance. So within the context of an organization, it's about how do you get the best out of your people in order to maximize their contribution. And for an individual, it's about how do I develop what I naturally do best to be the best I can possibly be. So from an organizational standpoint, talent development is an area that most organizations know they need to invest in, but all too often it's an area that's either underfunded or not done well. Many organizations invest heavily in recruiting the right talent, but then they often fall short of developing that talent to actually reach its potential once it's through the door. We hear all too often stories of employees who start new roles with little or no induction training and no clear path of development to follow. And I often think this is much like investing in the best racehorse that's out there and expecting it to win every race without training. And of course, that's just not going to happen. Then what about the approach that organisations take when developing their talent? So often, I think here the main focus tends to be on an individual's area of weakness and trying to fix those weaknesses. And whether this is through training programs, coaching, or perhaps mentoring, the development focus is often about fixing weakness rather than developing areas of strengths to maximise potential and therefore performance. It's also often a one-size-fits-all approach, with little recognition really that individuals are unique, often with differing needs. And then, of course, there's the reactive sticky plaster approach of ad hoc development programs, with little context or alignment to the organisation's goals, and often no real measures of success or follow-up to embed the learning. Let's now think about the talent pool that the organisations develop. The traditional approach has been to develop only permanent employees. But as the trend continues towards an on-demand workforce, the use of contract and contingent labour is going to be critical to sustain the performance of many businesses. So organisations are going to therefore need to rethink their approach to talent development, who they see as their pool of talent, and how they integrate the contingent workforce into their development programmes. Let's talk now about individual talent and look a bit more closely at what we mean by that. Talent in an individual is defined as a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behaviour that can be productively applied. And the key phrase here is can be productively applied. Talent is a productive asset that, when applied in the right situation, can be very powerful. So examples of talent include being able to strike up conversations easily, perhaps being able to easily influence others, or see patterns in data. Or it could be that you're somebody who's able to juggle lots of moving parts. And I often think here of the supermum stereotype, who works full-time and organises playdates, social diaries, and makes cake shop quality birthday cakes for her child. Now, we can't all do that, and I'm certainly not one of those people, but it is a talent. And for those who can, whilst it's doubtlessly challenging, it's quite likely that people with this talent get a buzz from all those spinning plates. So everyone has areas of talent, but recognising those talents, taking steps to develop them and aim them productively towards individual and organisational goals is where the most impact can be made. To achieve this, it requires managers to invest time by getting to know their team members as individuals. They need to listen to them. They need to understand their challenges and, of course, what drives them, and they need to support them to be successful. And interestingly, research shows that managers account for up to a 70% variance in employee engagement. So this really is a critical group. Managers who develop and support their employees' careers are more likely to have an engaged team. In the context of development, as we said, talent management is about maximising the potential of an individual's talent and the collective organisational talent pool in order to achieve optimum business performance. But more generally, talent management is about recruiting the best, then developing, engaging and supporting that talent to reach its potential and be the best it can possibly be. So a good talent management programme builds enthusiastic, loyal employees who are motivated and committed to achieving individual and organisational goals. So really, to be at its best, talent development needs to be part of an organisation's culture. And a little later, we'll talk about some of the steps you can take to make this happen. Organisations are beginning to recognise the need to develop their talent in order to remain competitive. Development is no longer a luxury that can be undertaken only when times are good. The smart organisations understand that it's a business imperative not only for sustaining performance, but also for attracting and retaining the best employees. By 2025, it's predicted that millennials will make up 75% of the population, and 55% of that population will be female. Research indicates that millennials rate learning and development high on their list of priorities, preferring to work for companies who are committed to their growth and their development. And a recent McKinsey study highlighted lack of learning and development as a key reason that women leave organisations. So growth through learning really is important to people. These days, talented workers are more likely to want to work in an environment where there is a high emphasis on growth and opportunity, even if it's at the expense of a lower salary. So if your organisation isn't offering growth and career development, then don't expect your talent to stick around for long. Of course, competitive advantage is a two-way street. Whilst organisations need to invest in development, individuals must also take ownership of their growth and development and show a willingness and ability to continually learn. The most productive combination is an organisation that enables high performance through the right development opportunities and employees who are motivated and committed to maximising those development opportunities. And of course, one drives the other.
You're posing something, I think, really important in this whole equation, and I want to pick up on the sort of tools that we can use in the job. But when I'm talking about this, I want us to focus on the critical role that managers play in this, because you've been talking about the importance of the individual and their headspace around, what do they want, as an employee, and what sort of growth and learning do they want on the one hand, and the importance of the organization and its investment in its talent pool on the other. But sitting in this, almost like the thing that's in the middle of this sandwich, and it's almost like a vice-like grip, is the role that managers and leaders play in the development of individuals. And I can see in the technical press in 2015 that we're starting to see more focus from organizations recognizing the importance. Now, when it comes to thinking about the best tools for the job, one thing that we can be sure of is that we're not short on tools, or methods, if you like, methodologies for how we actually get this going. And the importance of the recognition of the talent that Catherine was talking about, but now also the development of them. So learning and development interventions, yeah, for sure, but they need to be relevant and appropriate, and they need to be sustaining in order that that growth and learning is able to really get embedded. Things like psychological profiling that help individuals to understand themselves, but also understand the impact that they have with others. Coaching, strong one-on-one relationships that give people space to do good thinking. Mentoring comes into that as well. Strengths and the whole strengths industry, which is really burgeoning just at the moment, and we're going to come back to that in a few minutes' time. But I was interested in, well, what evidence is there that this stuff works, and what is it that we can do to affect effectively when we're trying to think about the recognition of talent and how to engage it? And I'm sure many of you will have come across Gallup's book on First Breaking All the Rules. That was the name of the book. But the subtitle was, What is it that the greatest managers do differently? And that's what the Gallup research looked into. And I make no apology for the fact that this is 15, 16 years old since this was published, because I have yet to see anything that is quite as powerful for organizations and managers particularly to understand whether they're able to make a difference. Here's the first question in the set of 12 questions that they asked in this research. They say, do I know what is expected of me at work? Simple question, but huge implications for the manager and for the organization, that an individual is able to say, yes, I do know what is expected of me at work, including the fact that my day tomorrow, because I've finished what I was doing yesterday, needs to change, and I have to think about it again. Think about an organization that has clear vision and clear goals, and a CEO who is absolutely wonderful at projecting the message around what it is that needs to be communicated for people to understand the context in which they do things. And how easily that is resisted, the barriers that go up at different levels in the organization, so that by the time you get down to the people who are actually doing the work, it's completely lost. They've lost that purpose and meaning, which we all know is so important to any effective organization, and particularly one that wants to recognize its talent and take an organization further forward. Throw another question in for you. Do I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right? You asked that question in 2015 to 2020 of millennials coming into the workplace with the expectation that the software that you're using, that they're using at home on their smartphones and their iPads, is as good, if not better, than the corporates. And that is the case. They're expecting to have technology moving at the same rate that they're able to buy it through Apple. And if you're not doing that, then what are you doing in terms of recognizing the talent agenda and making sure that you hold on to people? Final one in this section, is there someone at work who encourages my development? Is there someone who actually cares enough about me and what it is I'm doing here that they want me to stay, that they want me to be interested, that they want me, to use the common parlance, to be engaged? These are really big issues before you get into issues like the pace of work and the pace of change, and whether the development agenda in an organization, which may not even be investing at the right rate, as you were hearing a moment ago, what's happening to enable an organization to keep up with itself, keep up with the times, to be able to take that competitive advantage. So when you really think about how you nurture, how you get a sunflower to look as healthy as this one in the pictures, what is it that has to be going on? Well, clear about expectations is question one. Resources that I can do my job is question two. Here's one that always floors people whenever I'm talking to them, whether one-on-one or in groups. At work, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? Something I'm best at every day. Now, there's something very interesting that goes on in organizations, which, if you're good at something, an organization quite often gives you more of it because you're good at it and possibly you're the best at it. Doesn't mean that it's what you're best at. There's a difference, there's a tension there, and quite often people can get loaded with things which are good for the organization until they get sick of it and they think, is this really what it's all about? And then, what about the regularity with which you get recognition and praise from those that you work for? And in the Gallup questions, it was every week. Regular recognition and praise every week. Now, one of the things that we do know is that there is a bigger and a bigger head of steam coming towards us around the whole issue of feedback, our ability to give it and our ability to receive it. We're not very good typically at these things, and yet they underpin what's important in the talent arena for it to be effective at the way that you develop talent. I'm a recent fan of the professor of management at Columbia University, New York, Rita Gunther McGrath, who spoke actually at the CIPD in the UK last autumn on the subject of employer-employee strategic alliances. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful. She's actually a strategy professor. What she was talking about was we can no longer trade off stability of employment for loyalty. Just think about that in 2015. You cannot expect people to believe you with any degree of confidence that you can hold them, because they can see how difficult the world of employment is for an organization to navigate in the way that it wants to and control that navigation process when at various times it hits the ebb and flow of globalization, of changes in technology, of competition, whatever it is, that suddenly leads them to have an outflow of people. And previously you could trade off stability with loyalty. No longer. What she's saying is that the employer-employee strategic alliance around your work and why people will want to stay with you has now got a different dependency. It's the ability of an organization through its managers to get to know people. We need to get to know each other in order that we can have an ongoing and constant process of dialogue, which looks a bit like this, which is the contracting. I heard in the last 24 hours of a huge international business that's dropping a part of its performance management process because they don't see it as relevant anymore. And actually, again, somebody I'm quite a fan of in academia, a professor of organizational behavior, who's talking now about what is the purpose of performance management. Really, mostly it's a pain. It's a pain for people to have an expectation that it will be done to them, and it's a real pain for those who have to do it because they haven't got the time. So why are we even going through that process? The real thing, I think, that Gunther McGrath is driving at is you need regular conversations between people about recontracting, about what it is that's important to them in their work. And if I cite a paper that was produced last year, a piece of research by IBM's Smarter Workforce Institute, it said something very different. On the right in the green box, you'll see what it says here. The biggest differences in the scores between high potential people and what they deemed as average staff. And the one that was number one for this is the thing that the high potentials really need and want. And Catherine mentioned it a few minutes ago, and I'll tell you that for the last 35 years that I have been watching this space, this comes up number one or first equal in every single survey related to people in work. That really good people want to be working with really good people. Because when they do, they have an element of stretch. They have respect at the level of intellect. They have stretch in terms of the type of work that they do. And they get up in the morning and they really want to go to work. And that's really what I think Catherine was talking about a moment ago, about learning and growth. This is now a continuous process. It's always been a continuous process. For people that you respect as really being good at what they do, they've always had a mind to be curious and intrigued by what was going on in the world, what was going on in their world, going deeper into their technical know-how and their behavioral prowess as well. So it's no news. It's not rocket science. It's just that I think as we've got really clever at thinking about this space, we're beginning to see how important these very basic things are, and that they underpin our ability to develop our talent in an effective way.
Thank you, Simon. We're now into the first of our two Q&A slots. I will fire away at a couple of questions that have come towards us already. How much of talent management do you think falls down to the individual versus HR and versus the organization as a whole?
We'll probably touch on this in more detail a little bit later, but I absolutely think that there is ownership by all there. I think it's very much for the organizations to create the environment in which talent can learn, but then you need your talent to take ownership of their development. The organization creates the framework, they give the support for career development, but then it's really up to the employee to take ownership and actually drive that with the support, obviously, of their managers behind them.
I agree with that, and I think that there is a change that is happening, and it was hinted at a few minutes ago around the millennials who are coming into work, and indeed Generation Y, I think, were breaking through some barriers as well. I think that bearing in mind we have 4 generations at work now, the baby boomers and to some extent the Generation X's have been capable of being dependent. It's not a good thing to be dependent on the organization that you work for, because what it means is that you effectively hand the control stick over to them and say, you'll look after me, won't you? You'll give me that next job. Well, if you've been a talented individual and you have moved through the organization with a different job every 18 months, 2 years, every 3 years, and that was the way that it was through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. A lot of organizations were managing on that basis. It was easy to rock back and say, well, I'll be looked after. They'll send me on that next trip to LBS or to Harvard or whatever. And it happened. But I don't think that's the world anymore. I don't think that organizations are thinking quite like that. And definitely, if you want to have a talent pool, a talent culture that is moving along at the pace that you need it, you need the individuals engaged. You need them engaged by what the organization sets up and how it invests. Also, where HR has its place, and it has an important place, but as I was saying earlier on, I think the line managers have a huge amount to play in this, and I think that's the bit at the moment. It feels like a wobbly table, and it's the line managers who need more focus and more investment for them to be able to contribute more. That's the way I see it.
And Simon, look, and I'd absolutely agree with that, particularly around sort of the line managers. They absolutely have a key role to play, but I think they also need investing in. They need to understand actually how to do that development, what they need, having coaching conversations, understanding from their team members, what drives them, what their challenges are, and so on. So it doesn't just happen. You can't just tell them to do it. They have to actually be coached and develop themselves in order to do that. And I think if there's some investment around that area, then that would make a huge difference. performance. And interesting as well about organizations wanting their staff to take ownership. I did a workshop with a very large bank a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things they really wanted us to achieve as a result of that workshop was to have the people start to take ownership for their careers. So making sure that they actually drive the personal development plans. Again, giving them access to all of the resources that are potentially out there to support them, but having them actually drive and own their career development.
Very interesting. Thank you both. We have another question and some comments that have come in. Organizations rarely get the perfect employee, so they will have to spend more time initially developing them. So in the initial recruitment, how do you rate candidate aptitude over attitude?
I guess the key thing is that all individuals are different, right? And so to a certain extent, they're going to need a tailored approach towards some development. Interested to understand, I guess, at the outset is when you're at that recruitment stage and interviewing stage. For me, it would be very much aligning actually their aptitude with what you're hoping to recruit. So some thoughts around there with questioning, obviously, targeted questions, and really getting to the bottom of the individual around what drives them, motivates them, and what their aspirations are as well.
A couple of things occur to me in addition to that. What is it that you actually need when you bring someone in? You know, lying behind the question around what a perfect employee is, what is a perfect employee? Is that somebody that's actually going to do what you want them to do? Or are they actually going to do something that you don't want them to do, which could actually be damn useful for you as an organization? You know, what Nancy Klein in her more recent book, More Time to Think, she talks about the obedience culture that has been created over the last however many decades, where, you know, we are socialized in our families and our schools and on the organizations that we work for to be obedient. And yet actually, if you really want to be innovative and break through and be leading edge, bleeding edge, if you like, you want people who think in a different way and think out of the box. So I think there's a big question around what is it that you need and what is it, therefore, that a perfect employee looks like. I think the other thing is a really interesting second part of the question around aptitude and attitude. I think that, you know, if you look at somebody and you say, wow, look at what they've achieved in terms of their aptitude through school and through college and so on, and they've got the most fantastic gongs and awards, and, you know, wouldn't you want to hire that sort of person? And then you look at the background, look at their heritage, look at what opportunities were put in front of them. Yes, they would have worked pretty hard to get what they wanted, but how do you rate that compared to somebody who didn't have those same things? And actually, even though the aptitude that they displayed in terms of, you know, getting this level of qualification or credential is not quite so high, actually the journey they traveled was much tougher, much harder. Their level of resilience is in a completely quantum different space, and so on. So we call this the meritocracy, don't we, in terms of how people come through. So I think whenever you're thinking about how you hire, you want to try in the most holistic way possible to look at those sorts of things and not just rely on the results that somebody got from school or from college, which is often what we end up doing or close to doing.
Okay, thank you both very much. Shall we carry on for now?
So just before we broke for questions, Simon was talking about keeping pace, about organizations keeping pace with the rate of change. And this is really, I guess, one of the drivers for development, as he talked about. The 2015 Global HR Trend Survey by Deloitte actually highlighted learning and development as a top 3 talent challenge. And many respondents actually felt like their companies are neither ready or have the capability to meet the challenge. So what's driving the development need over and above what we've talked about already? Well, of course, there's the obvious need to remain competitive and achieve performance excellence. But this is becoming harder to achieve in an environment of rapid change and scarce talent. So there's a real need these days to actually leverage your entire talent pool and make sure you're maximizing its potential. I think for so long there's been a focus on developing high performers. But given that there is a scarcity of talent and this is going to continue and the environment is changing so rapidly, we're now going to need to focus on actually taking our talent pool as a whole and making it the best it can possibly be. So how do we do this? Well, providing growth opportunities or stretch assignments, really pushing your talent to step up is a great way of growing and helping your people to reach their potential. I read in a recent Harvard Business Review article on talent spotting, there was one senior ANZ executive who said his best development occurred as a result of these kind of stretch assignments. So providing growth opportunities through the right stretch assignments can be a real great source of learning and also a great motivator. And I think often as individuals, we don't realize how much we're capable of until we're pushed to the limit, and really real growth happens when we're on the front line, experiencing those new challenges and having to step up. Succession planning, of course, is another key driver for development. Businesses really need a bench strength so that if their employees exit, the business isn't impacted. So this means planning ahead, it means being proactive, it means establishing ongoing development programs so that there's little or no impact to business performance should employees leave. And it also means looking to leadership roles and identifying talent for your pipeline and developing their knowledge and skills in preparation so that they're ready to step up when the time comes. So organizations need to be thinking strategically. They need to be thinking strategically about their development programs, and they need to create an environment that sets their talent pool up for success while delivering the organization a talent pipeline that sustains business performance. We've already talked, obviously, about the need to attract talent, but I think along with this, organizations really need to get clear about what they want their employee experience to be. So we've talked a lot about millennials on this webinar and their need and thirst for growth and learning. So I think organizations really need to start thinking about their talent like customers. So employees and potential employees alike have access to so much information these days through social media and networking sites like LinkedIn, as well as being able to access results of the many top employer surveys that are carried out every year. And I think you only need to look to sites like Glassdoor to get a sense of the experience you can expect from an employer, covering the recruitment process all the way through to what it's like and the kind of experience you can expect working inside a company. So here you have an employer rating service which is much like you would rate hotels on TripAdvisor. So I think organizations really need to be clear about what makes them an attractive proposition to talent, and they need to build their brand in the marketplace. Much in the same way that individuals need to be clear about what makes them attractive to organizations that might be hiring them. So what can go wrong when it comes to developing talent? I guess the most common mistake I think of is promotion without the right development to support individuals. We see this all too often when you have employees who are high achievers, perhaps they're technical experts in their field, or maybe they're salespeople who've regularly exceeded their sales targets. And these high performers are often then promoted into management roles. And I think this can happen when they perhaps neither have the necessary skills or the desire to lead and manage teams. Then there's tick box performance management. We've already talked about performance management a little bit, and I think for many teams, performance management is something that is done once a year, with many managers viewing it as an administrative burden that they'd rather do without. I think for employees also, it can be a huge source of frustration. They perhaps don't clearly understand their goals or what's expected of them, but without a quality process that is ongoing, incorporates feedback and the opportunity to plan for development that is aligned to individual and organizational goals, employees not only lack direction, but also their measurements for success. I think employees need to know where they're heading, and they need to know how they're measuring up. They should know where they might need to make adjustments and where their areas for growth are. And as we've said already, it needs to be ongoing. It really cannot be a once-a-year exercise. There needs to be quality conversations with managers who make the time to regularly meet with their employees. Listen to their needs, know their areas of potential, listen to their career aspirations, and provide the appropriate level of support. So managers really, as we've said, have a real key role to play here. And it's really not surprising that research highlights that managers who excel at managing performance have more engaged employees than managers who struggle with it. Lack of organizational development planning can also be an issue. For a strategy to be executed successfully, it's critical that the people delivering have the relevant skills and knowledge to do so. We've talked about, obviously, drivers for development. We've talked about what can go wrong. Let's now talk about the how. Okay, how do you go about developing talent and maximizing its potential? And as I said, we're not just talking about high-performing talent here. We're talking about leveraging the whole talent pool, the collective human capital that helps an organization to sustain its performance and its profitability. In Collective Genius, Harvard business professor Linda Hill talks about leaders who believe that everybody has a slice of genius. And when looking at potential, it's not just about looking for leadership potential, because not everybody wants to or has the potential to be a leader, but they may have the potential to excel in a certain role or subject area. So what we're talking about here is the need to recognize the potential in everybody and take steps to develop that potential to maximize collective genius. So how do you go about recognizing and developing individual talent? We're going to talk now about strengths-based development, because adopting a strengths-based development approach can really help to maximize your potential. Strengths-based development involves individuals focusing on developing areas of natural talent and learning how to aim these talents productively towards achieving goals. Strengths-based development doesn't mean we ignore weaknesses. However, it means concentrating on further developing those things we do really well whilst managing areas of weakness to prevent failure. Simon has already talked about Gallup and the first break all the rules. Well, Gallup have been studying human behaviour and what makes people successful for over 75 years. And what they found is that people who focus on using their strengths at work have 7.8% greater productivity. They're 6 times as likely to be engaged in their jobs. And employees who receive strengths feedback have a 14.9% lower turnover. And teams who focus on strengths every day are 12.5% more productive. So there's lots of reasons to adopt a strengths-based development approach. It does, however, mean we stop trying to become well-rounded. It's recognizing that we can't be good at everything. It's about taking natural talents and sharpening them into distinct points or areas of excellence. And think about the effect of this on a team. So a team is obviously composed of many individuals who all have their own unique areas of strengths. But whilst individuals should be sharp, a team should be well-rounded. Think of a rugby team, for example. A rugby team, you've got 15 players, and each player has their own role to perform and skills that contribute to winning the game. But imagine if the rugby team consisted only of prop forwards. What kind of game would we have then? Well, for the team with only props, they'd be unlikely to have a fast-running backline who could cut through the opposition to score tries. The point is here that you need everybody playing in their position of strength. So a good team is well-rounded with everyone playing to their strengths and delivering together what they cannot deliver alone. So imagine an organisation where every individual has the opportunity to play to their areas of strength. Imagine the impact that that could have not only on productivity, but also on engagement.
This is reinforced by the work that Meredith Belbin was doing years ago in talking about the Apollos and how you can't build teams around people who all look the same and all the same athletically. The whole mindset that you have to bring to enable you to get to that place where you can develop your talent effectively is quite sophisticated and subtle and requires a huge amount more effort than many organisations thus far have put into it.
I'm currently working with one of the largest not-for-profit organisations in Australia, and I'm working with a leader who really understands the advantages of adopting a strengths-based development approach. And we were chatting earlier in the week, and he said to me, I want to get the best out of our people, and I want them to be excited about coming to work. So he really recognises that everyone's unique with different talents, and they can all potentially bring something different to the table. They're still on their strengths journey, but they've made some headway already, and they're starting to see the benefits. So they're already looking to reassign tasks according to the strengths of team members. And when it comes to putting together project teams, they're going to look to individual strengths profiles to ensure that they have the right mix of strategic thinking, influencing, and executing talents. We're talking here about potentially realigning job roles or tasks according to an individual's area of talent. And that can have a positive impact not only on employee experience and engagement, but also on team productivity and performance. And I think there's lots of evidence as we've already discussed this evening. Let's switch now to talk about a tool that you can use to actually help your talent actually discover what their areas of talent are. Before we switch to it, just a word on clues to talent. If you're not using a tool to help you discover these tools, the typical clues if you're having conversations as a line manager is understanding the activities that energize individuals or the activities that they pick up quickly. Again, it's not rocket science, it's just about having those conversations or the things that bring people most satisfaction. Okay, but not everybody can recognize their areas of talent. And if they need help in doing so, then a tool such as the Clifton Strengths Finder is a great starting point. So it's a Gallup tool. So Gallup's Clifton Strengths Finder, it's a starting point, as I said, for discovering talent. It's based on over 40 years of research of the study of success across a wide variety of functions and many different cultures. And the research basically showed that potential for success can be grouped into 34 themes or general areas of talent. And based on the way in which an individual responds to the Strengths Finder assessment questions, they're given a report which will identify their top 5 themes. It's called a signature themes report. And it's a little bit like a fingerprint, so it's unique to the individual. And this is amazing. The chances of having one individual having the same top 5 in the same order as somebody else is 1 in 33 million. So you can clearly get a sense of how unique it is. As I mentioned, it's a starting point. So discovering talent is really just the beginning of a strengths-based development journey. Much like developing muscles, talents need to be invested in order to develop them into areas of strength. So your employees, they may have untapped potential just waiting to be developed. And this is a great way of identifying that potential so that you can then take steps to develop it. Let's now talk about how you go out building a development culture. So a little earlier we talked about the need to do this to facilitate an environment in which your employees are supported to learn, if you like, and to sustain business improvement and performance through the contribution of your people. It really is critical for organisations to foster this culture of development. But how do you do it? And what are some of the tactics that you can employ to get started? Well, I think the first thing to say is it's not going to happen overnight. It needs to grow organically. It cannot be forced. But I do believe that senior leaders and managers can really help by promoting a learning environment. And I think they can do this by encouraging sharing of ideas, diversity of opinion, collaboration among teams, and really an open door policy when it comes to accessing managers' and leaders' expertise. And I've seen this done well in organisations in the past where you have, managing directors giving up their time and hosting breakfasts, teach-ins and so on from some of the role models within the organisation. So I think promotion of this sort of peer-to-peer learning and recognising employees as well for their contribution in doing that, their contribution for their knowledge sharing and coaching, that can also be a good motivator. Holding regular learning forums, as we've just said, so such as lunch and learn style sessions. I used to work in organisations where every Thursday we would have a lunch and learn, and it became lunch and learn Thursday. Everybody would bring their lunch along, as you'd expect. They would, give up their lunchtime for an hour where they could just learn about a new topic, a new technology. They were great events, and you'd get lots of really interesting questions, so you'd get lots of peer-to-peer learning going on there as well. So online teachings and sharing success stories. Perhaps there's a client win that has just been achieved. So having the person or the team that actually kind of went through that process and won the client share with the rest of the firm or the other teams within the firm what contributed to that success, what was their differentiator. And that can really also benefit learning within the company and help to promote this culture of development. I mentioned just then the use of role models. I'm really a strong believer in role models. So it's who are the role models in the organisation and what is it that they do really well? Again, having these individuals share their journey and what they do to really differentiate themselves can be a huge source of learning and inspiration that contributes towards building this culture. Then, of course, things like mentoring, coaching, and internal support networks. People really need to feel valued and supported. So programs that support their career development through providing opportunities to share experiences, knowledge, and the opportunity to learn from senior members of the firm can all contribute towards building this culture of development. Cross-silo projects too, great promoter of learning, promote collaboration and also creative thinking. It's also a great way to promote mobility by providing your people with a view into other business areas. So these are just a selection of ideas to talk about. But, as I said, it's not going to happen overnight. It has to sort of grow. And it's a little bit like, once you start doing a few events and people start seeing the benefits of them, it will be a great way to foster that culture. Facilitating high performance. For me, this is really about organisations creating the right conditions, as we were talking about earlier, and the right environment for talent to maximise its potential and be at its best. This means ensuring that there is clarity for all about what great performance looks like. And with this, knowing the steps along the way and the development pathways to achieve success. It's commonplace these days for organisations to have internal learning hubs, but so often these are buried deep in the intranet and they're therefore underutilised. These need to be visible. All these resources need to be visible and communicated to all. I recently did some work with a very large company who had a vast array of quality learning resources. But out of a group of around 30 people I was delivering a workshop to, only one person knew they existed, which was really quite surprising. So it's critical not only to have learning resources that are relevant and usable, but visible and easy to find. Performance development plans are a must. I think employees need to be working in partnership with managers, in my opinion. The performance development plans help to set direction, and they help to turn performance and career goals into reality. And I think when done well, they can bring clarity to where employees are going and how they're going to get there. And again, it's the line manager support here and the partnership between the organisation and the individuals in driving that career development. We've discussed talent. We've discussed the drivers for development, talent attraction, retention, and engagement, along with the steps that can be taken to develop that talent effectively. And I think to bring it full circle, what we're really talking about here is empowering our employees, empowering our talent to take ownership and drive their development and career success, but within a framework that supports them to achieve this. So the organisation creates the environment in which talent can grow, the talent can develop, and the talent can excel. And they do this with the help of their leaders who create the context, the why around what they're doing. Where are they heading, and the development that they need to support them to execute the organization's strategy. So development needs to be aligned with strategy. It's about developing individual talent and collective genius for your whole talent pool to reach its potential. It's about development aimed at delivering results that help organizations to sustain performance, remain competitive in the marketplace, and become an employer of choice for both existing and potential employees.
I've just been reflecting on how it needs to be something that is living and breathing day to day, whilst at the same time, for every individual, their needs are not necessarily day to day. You know, a lot of people will go for quite some time being completely fine, and there are other people who need a lot of nurturing on a much more frequent basis to be kept attentive and kept engaged with, you know, you and what you're doing within your team and the opportunities that there may be for them. So it's such a big, vibrant mix, a potpourri, really, of things that have to be so in order to develop our talent effectively across organizations, big and small.
Okay, thank you. So we're now into the final of our 2 Q&As. How do you make the manager, i.e. each manager, the developer of their local talent?
We have to look, I think, a bit closer at how people are actually prepared to go into management jobs. I'm sure many of us will appreciate how frequently either we personally or people that we know have been taken through into the management cadre, and it's been done because possibly it's the only way to pay them more money. Hell's bells. That is true, that sometimes we don't have the flexibility in the way that we structure our organizations and our pay scales to actually pay people for being really good at what they do without them needing to take a manager role if that's not what they want to do, or we know that, or they know that they're not going to be good at it. Sometimes it's done because something has happened with someone being ill or somebody leaving, and we just need to plug a hole, so we put somebody in it who actually is seen then to be inappropriate, and we've then got to find a way of backing out of it, and how embarrassing is that going to be, and sometimes it can cost us money. So we've got all of these different things happening in these dynamics, and I think that we really just have to think harder about the movement of people into these really important roles. The manager role, the leader roles in organizations, we've always known how fundamentally important they are, but as we focus more attention on how we develop talent effectively, we have to recognize that this particular part of our organizational scenario has got to be taken more seriously, and we've got to think about how we select them, how we develop them, how we support them, as Catherine was saying, when they get into role, and make sure that they are able to answer these really hard questions that come along to say, so where am I headed next? What is my pathway? What am I going to do that actually gives me a bit of stretch? Whatever. Those are difficult questions to answer if you're underprepared.
Okay, thank you both. Another question has popped in. What metrics would you suggest to set up in order to measure employees' engagement and development culture?
Gallup actually do a great Q12 survey, which measures employee engagement based on those 12 questions. Simon was talking earlier in First Break All the Rules. So having that kind of, using some of those questions that Simon was talking about, I think is a great way of measuring engagement, but also then having those kind of regular conversations with line manager, with their staff, in those ongoing conversations to understand how engaged their employees are.
There are lots and lots of other surveys, climate surveys like this that can be undertaken. I think the key to it is not just to do them, but to be transparent in the doing of them and to be seen to actually be doing something about it when you hear what's going on.
Okay, thank you both. One more question. Can you suggest some quick wins, i.e. small things that I can do that have a big impact to help leadership understand the importance of talent management? So this individual has no influence, or they don't think they have any influence over global management, but could do with some small things with local management that could be a way in to getting talent management higher up on the global agenda.
The type of development that we're talking about does not need to cost very much. In fact, there's a lot of things that you can do which cost nothing. You heard about one a moment ago, the lunch and learn thing. In my experience, somebody was going to buy their sandwich anyway, so why not go and spend some time with their peer group and listen to something interesting and actually progress the agenda of the organization, even if it's just sharing of knowledge so more people know what's going on. I think that if you are sitting in an organization that feels, quite big and you think, oh, how on earth am I going to influence this? Bring it right back to base and look at what is the propensity that exists within an individual or a clutch of individuals in your team to do something which is beyond the expectation of those around you. So it might be to just sort of press into, depends of course completely the context and the situation that you're in, but maybe to do something which is just pushing a little bit further out. I'll give you an example of the sort of thing I mean. Where does all this energy come in organizations to raise money for charity? It's a huge sort of wellspring of people and time that goes into doing that sort of thing and going for runs and cycle rides and raising money for charity, which is fantastic. But if you have that, this is not a sort of a finite amount of energy. It's an infinite amount of energy if you as a leader can tap into it and find something that's going to awaken the interest of those who are slightly outside of your orbit, and then they're going to go, wow, did you see that? Did you hear what they're doing? It's that sort of thing which makes people curious about you, which is then you'll then have the platform in which to engage.
Perhaps also sharing success stories of where, if you can, of impact that has been achieved and in other organizations where they've had successful talent management programs. I think really depending on what the person asking the question is trying to achieve, whether if it's just raising talent management up the agenda or if it's actually aiming to get a program underway, it is really look and do your research, go out and have a look on the internet and different organizations and companies where they've done a great job of talent management and the impact that it's had. And I think having some evidence there in front of your senior team perhaps will spark some interest and also allow you to gather some momentum with your quest.
Okay, thank you both. So I think we've come to the end of today's webinar. So thank you, Catherine and Simon, for a really interesting session, and thank you all very much for joining us. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss your specific organizational or personal career challenges, then please do feel free to contact us. You can email Simon or Catherine or pop us a note through the website itself. You can also take a look at a short and fun animation on our website which introduces our way of developing talent effectively. You will also find more animations from us covering a variety of different career challenges with little tips and tricks on our YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining us, and hopefully see you again on the next webinar.